Men who are doing this scarcely get to bed at all, but obtain what sleep they can in their boats. My motor cobble works in partnership with a salmon cobble, the men taking turns to sleep in the salmon boat. There are 2 men in a salmon cobble, anchored at the end of her nets, but it is only necessary for one man to be awake. Can there be any doubt that these men require a rest on Sunday? The short summer season enables the men who are too old for the hard work of regular fishing to earn a little money to help them over the winter. More valuable still, perhaps, it enables them for a short time to get out to sea once more. This means much to men who have spent almost all their lives afloat. Visitors sometimes grumble at the tariff charged for the hire of a fishing boat. Perhaps some adjustment is required for certain short journeys, especially with regard to mothers with several children. But the tariff for a boat hired for fishing is not too high. The running costs of a motor cobble are not small. A visitor should remember when he hires a boat for himself, he is hiring one which should take a dozen people. If the tariff was split among a dozen passengers, it would be very small. He should also remember that he is provided free of cost with lines, hooks and sinkers, that if he is fishing over the rock he frequently breaks hooks and loses sinkers, that he is found in bait which has entailed much hard work in gathering and may have been bought, that he is allowed to ask endless tiresome questions and receive civil answers free of charge, from men who have, perhaps, been up all night, but still manage to keep their tempers, that the short season is a little harvest to hard-working men who may have a bad winter to face, and that, if he is lucky, he will be able to take enough fresh fish back to his lodgings to provide several free meals for his family. Motor cobbles are, for obvious reasons, obliged to charge a higher tariff than sailing boats. The way in which fishermen and fisherwomen help each other is one of the finest traits in their characters. No one ever goes hungry if someone else has got a dinner. But there is one point which I think the inshore fishermen all around the coast might consider. It is whether they are quite generous in expecting payments for manning a lifeboat to go to the aid of their fellow fishermen. At Filey and other fishing villages the lifeboat is launched to stand by local cobbles or other fishing boats caught in a sudden storm on probably 4 out of every 5 occasions. The lifeboat has been bought and sent to its station by private subscriptions. The fishermen have not had to buy it. They only profit by it. It would be a gracious act to give their services free when turning out to stand by their friends. A lover of nature need never feel dull when fishing from a cobble. Every day, and often every hour, brings a change in sky and sea, and day by day throughout the year he may watch the procession of species of fishes and birds passing in and out again on their migrations. At the proper time he can watch much interesting birds, as black-backed gulls, great northern and red-throated divers, great-crested grebes, shags and cormorants. Note the time when flocks of ducks arrive and the air is full of diving terns and sandpipers hurrying in the ripples. Watch as I have watched from my boat brave starlings arriving over the sea from Norway, flying low down just above the waves in companies of about a dozen. Listen to buzzards mewling as they circle high above the cliffs, or follow with his eyes peregrines hawking over the great headland. Fishermen have methods of doing business with each other which do not commend themselves to chartered accountants. The system of barter is very prevalent. A friend of mine lent a fisherman £5. Shortly afterwards he was repaid by the delivery to his door of a barrow load of codfish. He was a good businessman in the ordinary sense of the word, but was completely beaten by this form of currency. Buckets of mussels are exchanged for lengths of line or anything else which is wanted, making the keeping of accurate accounts almost impossible, and entirely unnecessary except for the satisfaction of tax collectors. I find the greatest difficulty in returning a true account of my income from my 2 cobbles. All one can say is that we arrive there or thereabouts. It is so refreshing to be in a business in which those engaged in the same line square accounts with each other there or thereabouts. There is something very big about the "that'll do" which settles these matters. Income tax officials have been very active among the fisher folk of late. How they are faring I do not know, but can guess. I asked one ancient mariner, who really has an income from letting lodgings and other sources, what he was returning on his paper. My pension, he said. That is all the money belonging to government that I have got. I don't see that my private money has anything to do with them. I am glad I am not an income tax official. Jack Jenkinson, or Jossie, is running my motor cobble Barbara, and Robinson the tyke. The arrangement between owner and crew of a cobble is a very fair one, which might well be copied in other walks of life. Barbara has a crew of 3 men. The men do not pay me a fixed rent. The value of a catch is divided into 4 shares, one for each man and one for the boat. The boat is myself, the owner. The boat share is on a less percentage than those of the men. Under this arrangement, a good catch means good money for owner and men, a poor catch short money for all of us, and if weather stops the boat, it puts an end to the owner's drawings as well as to those of the men. The owner's job is to maintain the boat in a seaworthy condition, fitted up with all the necessary tackle, and to take all risks of damage or loss. Shares are settled every Saturday night. Necessary expenses, such as purchase of bait for long lines, hauling up, etc., are deduced from sales before division. Salvage money, which we occasionally earn, is divided up in the same way. We never quarrel about our shares, but I expect we get them thereabouts. Most of the cobbles are owned by fishermen, some families having 2 or 3 boats. Fisher folk are a race to themselves, a race of ancient lineage, whose males have lived a man's life in a man's way for centuries. I cannot help feeling that the bay is their bay. The population of retired people, tradesmen and lodging house keepers are comers, who should walk warily upon the land of this ancient people. There are no trade unions among cobblemen, no 8-hour day, no fixed time of starting or leaving off work, no standard scale of remuneration. As they say in the West Riding, they do as they've a mind. The Board of Fisheries makes regulations for them which are obeyed, there or thereabouts. They are one of the few remaining bands of free men in a regulation's sick age. Most of the fishermen are better known by their by-names than by those given to them by their godfathers and godmothers. To ask for one of them by his proper name is often to meet a puzzled "Who do you mean?" But to suggest that you want to see Jossie or Rossie or Rammy or Baltic or Dicky Hoy or Laffy is to be understood at once. My first cobble was second-hand when I got her, and I made the mistake of putting in an engine. Not that I wanted an engine, I hate the things, but everybody said I must have one in case of emergency. Jack and I never used the engine if we could avoid it. He was bred and brought up in sail, and at the bottom of his heart hates engines as much as I do. The weight of the engine in launching and pulling up strained a boat not built to carry it, and by 1930 she was worn out. In the meantime, the old craftsman in his tarred shed had built me the tyke. Jack and I worked her and loved her, but it was quite evident that no sailing cobble could compete with motor ones, which everyone had adopted for the winter fishing. More lines can be laid by a motor cobble, and what is more important, motor cobbles can more or less guarantee to be in with their catch for market at a given time, which sailing ones cannot do. It became evident that a motor cobble must be built for the winter fishing, and so the Barbara was born. The old craftsman had the order to build her, but before the first plank was laid he died. The Barbara was therefore built at Whitby. Luck has been with her from birth. The date fixed for launching arrived. I received a wire from the builder to say that he would rather put it off for 24 hours, as there were a few little things to finish. That night there was a cloudburst up the Esk. The river came down in flood, swept away bridges, uprooted trees, foamed through Whitby harbour, wrecked many boats, and tearing others from their moorings, swept them out to sea. Had the Barbara have launched, she would have ridden at anchor in the harbour that night, and have met the full force of the flood. A few days later she was towed to Filey. We ran her trials from Filey to Scarborough and back again. Everything worked well. We took her over from the builders, and she joined the Filey Cobble fleet. 38 cobbles anchored out that night. It was the middle of August. Nobody expected a sudden storm at that time of year. Nobody knew that the Filey Cobble fleet was to suffer the greatest disaster it had ever known. The northern end of Filey Bay is protected by a great reef of oolitic limestone rocks, forming a magnificent breakwater. The eastern or landward end of this reef is covered by cliffs of boulder clay. These cliffs are called the Carnets. It is the custom of the fishermen to anchor their cobbles under shelter of the Carnets in summer when the glass is high and settled weather seems to be certain. It saves the expense of hauling up and the heavy work of launching. On that night in August 1930 there was no sign of a change in the weather, yet early next morning it was blowing a heavy gale from east-southeast. Against that wind there is no protection. The bay lies open to its full fury. Fishermen out on the cliffs early in the morning saw seas breaking over the boats as they strained at their moorings. Something had to be done. At 5:30 the lifeboat was launched, packed with men. She has no motor, only oars and sails. The sea was by this time tremendous. The lifeboat reached the anchorage, and as she passed the boats, men jumped from her into the cobbles, cut their cables, and steering them through the breakers, beached them on the sand. It sounds almost incredible, but it was done. One to come ashore was the Barbara. She was undamaged. The lifeboat returned for more men, but the breakers drove her ashore, and she stuck in the sand and could not be refloated. Nothing more could be done. 11 cobbles sank, 2 were driven ashore, and 3 went out to sea. One, a salmon boat, was picked up some days later 12 miles from Scarborough. Her nets were found 7 miles east of the brig. One was never heard of again. The other was eventually dashed to pieces on rocks. Only the Tyke held on. Spectators stared through their glasses in wonder. An enormous wave hit her. Surely she had gone. No, she had capsized, but floated bottom upwards, and her anchors held. For several hours she sustained the uneven battle against the gale, which could not sink her or tear her from her moorings. Jack was nearly mad with grief, and so was Robinson, who had hired her in the summer and learned to love her. The lifeboat was stuck fast. Nothing could be done. Yes, it could. Through tremendous seas the Barbara dashed to the rescue of her sister. Cables were cut, grappling irons struck, and amidst round upon round of cheers from the crowds assembled, the gallant little ship came ashore. Filey brig has an unenviable reputation among shipping. 3 vessels were ashore on this reef in the month of January this year. In the early hours of the morning of 7th of January the hull trawler Johannesburg went ashore on the outermost point. Tide was ebbing. She was, therefore, soon fast. The Filey lifeboat was launched, but the crew of the trawler refused to leave, hoping to refloat her on the flood. When flood came, the wind, which had been blowing hard from north-west, went to north and north-east and blew with gale force. 20 Filey fishermen had boarded her to help the crew of 8 get her off on the flood. The gale increased in violence, and very soon great seas were breaking over the boat, and the men were frequently up to their waists in water. But it was obvious they could not remain. The Filey lifeboat was again launched and attempted to reach the vessel wedged among a tangle of rocks. Flood tide and gale were coming together. Under such circumstances the sea comes round the brig end like a mill race. The lifeboat approached to within 40 yards of the wreck and could make no further progress. A spectator on the cliffs timed her. For 20 minutes the crew rowed with all their strength and only managed to maintain their position. At length a boy with a rope attached, flung overboard from the trawler, floated near enough to be caught. Communication was established. The extra manpower of those on board the trawler hauling enabled the lifeboat to draw up. Just as she got within 10 feet the trawler heeled over. 26 of the 28 men jumped for the lifeboat, landing on top of the crew. No one was hurt. At this moment the powerful motor lifeboat from Scarborough arrived on the scene. Her engines enabled her to approach and take